Hello and welcome to our webinar today. I'm your host, Rory O'Shea. Thanks for joining us. Having a disaster recovery plan that's both strategic and executable means having the right IT solutions in place that will allow you to recover quickly should an outage take place. Different businesses have different needs, and to develop a workable, airtight disaster recovery plan, you need to understand the benefits and limitations of your options. In today's webinar, our expert panel will discuss the topic of disaster recovery and solutions that help in areas of data integrity, IT system recovery, and workforce continuity, along with the connectivity to support. Please allow me now to introduce our discussion panel for today. Craig Brown, Senior Manager, Hosting and Cloud at Allstream, and Lori Elliott, Director, Recovery Solutions at SunGard Availability Services. Welcome to Craig and Lori. As always, I will ask our panelists a number of questions, then we'll address any questions that you may have. Remember, you don't have to wait to ask. If in fact a question comes to mind at any point during the conversation, simply type it into the text box at the bottom of your video console, and we'll be sure to review it during our Q&A period. Okay, so let's begin, and Lori, we'll start with you. Let's clarify the two types of recovery technologies. What are the essential differences?
The online network backup is a backup and recovery solution that utilizes the customer's existing network to move data from their local site to a remote recovery site. It's a very cost-effective and simple way to do it because it doesn't require any additional hardware on the customer site. Additionally, it leverages the capability to use a shared infrastructure for recovery, which means they don't have to have a huge CapEx expenditure at the time, but could actually utilize those resources on a monthly service contract.
Craig, anything to follow up there?
Sure. Well, backup and recovery, they sound very similar, but there really are some significant differences. Backup, for example, is a snapshot of data at a particular moment in time, whereas replication into the cloud is really, it's a real-time replicated version of the physical server into a virtualized cloud environment. So that means that the data and applications are always available to end users because it is an actual virtualized version of the physical server that's there. So this can mean faster recovery time and eliminating the need to recover from backup vaulted data.
Now, I imagine the choice of solution can vary depending on the size and type of the business. Lori, can you differentiate them in terms of specific limitations or advantages?
Absolutely. One of the things we find is that it's very appropriate for businesses small and large, especially businesses that have multiple sites, whether it's just a couple sites or many sites. If I would think about industries like finance, healthcare, manufacturing, where you have multiple warehouses, those businesses have multiple sites, but they usually don't have IT on those sites. But yet they have data that needs to be backed up and sent off to a safe place for recovery should an event happen. This is a great solution for them because, again, it doesn't have to have any additional hardware on the site. It's automated, which means you don't have to have anybody local to manage it, and you can remotely manage it to make sure things are completing. So from that standpoint, we find a lot of businesses really are taking benefit of it being a complete solution that's automated, remotely managed, but it's still meeting their business requirements.
Craig, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, likewise, cloud replication is appropriate to all businesses, large and small. However, we think it's probably most attractive to small and medium-sized businesses. And this is because when you look at traditional replication solutions, you're really talking about exact duplication of your IT infrastructure. You're talking about provisioning physical servers, putting the software on them, setting them up in a separate offsite data center, and that can be extremely expensive and complex and difficult to not only set up but to manage as well. And it's probably out of the reach for many small, certainly medium-sized organizations. Whereas with cloud replication, the provisioning is quite different. It's a fast provisioning via, literally it's just through keystrokes. You don't have to purchase a set of physical hardware and network. You can literally be up and running in a cloud replicated environment within 24 hours. And then operationally ongoing, it's a highly scalable service as well. It's adding servers when required. There's no concern for availability of data center space and power, which is usually an issue.
So there's a lot to think about for businesses trying to develop an IT posture that fits into their business continuity planning needs. Let's discuss some of the technical issues then. How can we address organizational concerns around data integrity, Lori?
I think one of the first things to do is to look at why customers are looking at improving their data integrity. Power outages, for example, are still the #1 reason why customers go down and need to recover. But what we're finding is it's actually cybercrimes, hackers, viruses, things that are causing data corruption that's causing them to want to improve data integrity so they can have better recoveries. If you think about it, a business who goes down, they're going to probably have to go back a couple days to get a good copy of data. They want to make sure that good copy of data is restorable. So if you think about most customers today, they still use tape, and tape is still a very good medium. The challenge with tape is that it's a very manual process. I think it was Gartner that said 1 in 5 backups will never recover, mainly due to human error. This is because it's a manual process. And then the restore is also a manual process, and it's also going to be a lengthy process. So as you look at moving to something online, whether replication or online backup, what you're doing is you're creating a good copy of data in a protected location and usually encrypted, so you have higher security. This enables us to then be able to create more of an online automated process. For example, with the online backup, you can use schedulers to create your automatic backups to run. You can do this remotely. You can check to make sure they ran. So you have a greater confidence in the data integrity of that copy. Now, when you go to do your recovery as well, you're reducing your manual process. If you think about tape, when you go to do a tape recovery, the first thing you have to do is usually go get the tapes from a remote site. So by shortening that, by having the tape already on site, already in an online copy, you could probably reduce your recovery time by another 24 hours. So improving the data integrity and moving to an online technology not only improves the data integrity, it improves your recovery time.
So 1 in 5 is potentially susceptible due to human error, 20%? The number's that high?
It is, if you think about it.
That's huge.
Real quick, the tape process is, the first thing you do is you have to install the tape. Hopefully you install it right. You have to run the backup. Then you have to remove the tape. You have to label the tape. You have to ship the tape somewhere. So it's all very manual. And then when you do your restore, you have a tape set. You have to get the right set of tapes. You have to make sure you have all of them and that they're all loaded in the proper order. The manual process is one of the things that cause customers the most issue.
It seems pretty straightforward, but I guess just the possibility of something going wrong, that's way too high. You can't have that risk factor.
Correct.
Yeah. Craig, anything to add there?
Well, I would add to what Lori said about the similar issues with data integrity exist for cloud replication services, but I would also say that anything regarding the cloud brings up a number of issues for IT managers. The #1 concern is probably security, because of the very nature of the cloud, when an IT manager is considering using a cloud environment, they're going to be trusting the service provider for the security of the data as it resides in the cloud. And typically these services also rely on an internet access between the customer's server environment and the cloud environment, which again brings up its own issues of security on the connectivity. So how do we address these issues? Well, first off is within the cloud, IT managers need to be assured that these replicated virtual servers are set up in an isolated network and virtual environment. They're separate from each other, they don't talk to each other, they don't see each other. And then second, when it comes to the internet connection, you have to ensure that whatever size connection you have is that it's protected through an IPsec VPN tunnel.
Okay, whether I use cloud-based replication or a network backup solution, I can safeguard the integrity of my data. But let's say my organization experiences a network outage. My data may be safe, but I can't connect to it. Craig, what do I do?
Well, sure. I mean, there can be either a system failure or a failure of the network. Either way, your primary servers are going to be down and inaccessible. However, if you've got them replicated into the cloud, there's an immediate failover to that replicated version. So let's say, for an example, you've got an e-commerce website. You're running it on a server that you have replicated into a virtualized cloud environment. If that fails, there's an immediate failover to the version in the cloud, but your customers are completely unaware of that. They continue to conduct transactions, make purchases, make inquiries while the physical server is in the process of being restored. And you can take really as much time as you need to restore that physical server and then fail back when that's completed. Another example would be employees accessing email through the cloud. You replicate a Microsoft Exchange server, for example, into the cloud environment. Something happens to the server, employees continue working as is. They keep going, it's business as usual on that virtualized environment until the physical environment is restored.
Okay, once the network has been restored, how do I resume normal operation?
So my best recommendation is always to tier the recovery. So not all applications are created equal. And to give your staff a really good focus on what to recover first, I recommend businesses look at the financial impacts. Just because it might cost you revenue doesn't mean it might be the highest priority application. Many applications are bound by different government regulations, industry regulations, etc. So the penalties or fines for that application being down might be greater than the revenue losses. So it's always good to map out the financials of those applications and then build a recovery strategy that tiers the recovery to the applications based on their business value. This helps companies really balance their availability, performance, and cost. For example, if you look at a business process like ERP, say I'm a manufacturing company, not all the applications in that business process have equal value. You have to understand the interdependencies of them, of course, but what we might look at is, say, the web ordering, much to Craig's point. That might be an application that has to be up all the time, because that being down, you'll lose revenue. You may also lose business reputation. So that might be a good candidate for online replication. The next one might be our orders database. We like to get orders, but we don't necessarily have to process them in 24 hours. That might be a good candidate for an online backup. Other applications in the environment, such as inventory management, accounts payable, we might carry 3 days of inventory, so we don't have to worry about recovering those for 48 hours. And so it's really looking at the different applications, the business value, and then giving focus to our staff on how best to recover it for business results.
Okay, let's talk about connectivity. What should different customer segments be looking for to support their physical or virtual recovery solutions?
So with online backup and recovery, you really need to look at two separate networks. One is the front-end network. That's the one that's going to connect the local site to the recovery vault. Things that you need to consider at the local site are how much backup data are you going to push every day? Do you do full backups? Do you do incremental backups? Are you sending just the changed data? The online backup and recovery solution will actually encrypt and compress the data before it transmits it. But even if you're doing full backups, that's still a lot of data. Other things to consider is how often do you have to restore lost or deleted files, because now you're going to be pulling things back from the vault to restore those files. You might also have requirements for reducing data loss. You might want to use snapshots and back up those snapshots on an hourly basis. So depending on what your recovery and your data protection needs are, that's going to tell you what you need to do with your network. Best thing to do is to get started. As you get through it, learn what your needs are, how to tune for your needs. That'll tell you how you need to tune your network on the front end. The back end network is what connects your recovery data to the systems that are going to bring your business back up and running. And again, there are things to consider. You want to consider, do you need dedicated networks there? Can you use shared networks? What type of private firewalls? Things like that. You want to make sure that you're looking at the choices of networks you have that's going to best meet your business requirements. And one of the things I always recommend is know your industry regulations, because in a lot of cases, for security reasons, private networks, things like that are a requirement. Other things to consider is that at the time of recovery, it also helps you with things that share network, and those shared environments help you, especially if you're virtualizing. One of the things we're finding with a lot of businesses is they virtualize 10% of their environment, and they say these great cost savings and space utilization, and the recovery is working very well. But once they get to about 50%, what's happening is that they're finding they shorted themselves on capacity, or they shorted themselves on network. Now, if a customer had their own site, the problem with that is they wouldn't have that accessible. They would have to go into a quick ship program or something like that. Now that they're connected to a shared recovery environment with many assets, we can quickly allocate the additional bandwidth or the additional servers or storage, whatever they need to really have a successful recovery.
Thoughts, Craig?
Well, I would add to that. It's as Lori said, I think with replication in the cloud, one of the drivers of bandwidth is going to be obviously how much you're actually replicating. And I think you're probably not going to replicate all of your archive data. It's going to, because again, it's a real-time replication. It means, the main objective is to ensure that users and customers or other stakeholders continue to have access to the important applications and data at all times. And typically that's the real-time, the data that's pertinent for that moment. Now, obviously you're going to need there's going to be significant bandwidth requirements perhaps initially when you're first doing the setting up the replication. But unlike backup, it's a continuous process. It's a real-time replication of data and the server environment into the cloud, which means continuous usage of bandwidth, whereas with backup it can be periodic or it can be happening just at nighttime. Again, if you're looking at, say, a minimum bandwidth requirement, talking about an internet connection in this case, ADSL, yes, that would probably do it for some small organizations, but realistically, you're going to be looking at, an E10 Ethernet 10 megabits per second bandwidth speed or faster.
Okay, let's discuss end user access, meaning if disaster strikes and my business continuity plan goes into action, how do my key people access data and critical applications such email, management software, that type of thing?
Well, sure, Rory. I mean, again, the failover process is pretty straightforward. So if there is an outage or a system failure, there's an automatic failover to the replicated environment in the cloud. So again, users and customers can continue to access data and critical applications through that replicated cloud environment. Again, what's really great about this, though, is that it doesn't require any action on the part of users. They simply continue using the application they were using, whether it's SharePoint, whether it's Microsoft Exchange, whether it's an e-commerce website. They continue to have access to that, and it's business as usual. Typically, the users aren't aware that there even was an outage until after it's been resolved.
Lori, do you have anything to add to that?
Pretty similar on the online backup and recovery side. We use IP redirects so that business processing is transferred to the recovery site. Users will log in with VPN or whatever security method that they've actually set. The one thing I would add is that in some cases, when users can't access, meaning maybe it's a power outage, down power lines, things like that, or in some cases there are industry requirements where certain users have to be local and aren't allowed to remotely access. In those cases, we have what we call workgroup seats. These are offices that we have set up for clients to bring their key users in so that they are directly in the building connecting to the systems and not through some outside connection. The thing about that is it gives them the capability to be sure that at that facility, which has multiple UPS, generators, things like that, even if things around them aren't operating, their business can continue in that environment. One thing I'll add as well is any business who's putting together their business continuity plan needs to make sure they have good communication and training for those users on how they will connect in case of an event and where they will go to connect.
So what are some of the challenges to implementing a disaster recovery plan, Craig?
Well, probably one of the biggest ones is selecting a technology that takes full consideration of business processes and requirements. There's so many choices out there in terms of how you can achieve a disaster recovery plan and implement a disaster recovery plan, but they're not necessarily all appropriate, not only for the size and scope of your business, but for specific applications within your business. So that means, you've got to have a good understanding of which systems are mission critical and business critical, those that you cannot afford any downtime on, versus those that could wait 24 to 48 hours for restoral. So the answer to that question is going to drive the choice of technology solution.
Lori, anything you want to add?
Absolutely. So one of the things I find makes a very good business continuity plan and then a DR plan is having executive involvement. You want to make sure that you have the executive sponsorship because that's going to drive how staff and even funding participate. And speaking of funding, one of the things I find is that a lot of businesses, when they think about recovery plans, they think it's just an insurance policy of something that might happen. One of the things I want to point out with is whether you're looking at online backup or other online replication type of scenarios, there's some things that it'll actually do for you to improve your daily operations that have nothing to really do with your recovery site. So using online backup as an example, if you have been historically tape-based, you might be very hesitant to delete anything, thinking that you may not get it back. I find a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, run under that concept. So what we've been able to do is work with them to identify different environments where they're just keeping all this aged data. Now, when you move that to an online method that's maybe protecting in a RAID 5 or a RAID 6, your data integrity and your protection is much higher. So you know you're going to be able to get it back if you need it. This enables a business to take maybe an Oracle database or an email store and start deleting some of that, maybe 20% or 10% of some of that aged data. Now, if you know anything about Oracle databases or email stores, you know that the smaller they are, the better they run. So you get a performance advantage in your daily operations. Additionally, the smaller they are, the faster they recover. So now you improve your recovery time and have less downtime. The last thing is that it actually can give you a financial advantage because now you've freed up more online storage, so now you have more growth space. The other thing we find is, because we've talked a lot about the manual processes and moving away from them, what we found is that businesses who move from the manual tape process to an online automated process have actually been able to free up 50 to 75% of some of their staff. The great thing about that is it's not always that they're looking to reduce staff, but usually that they need more staff to drive programs that are going to generate revenue. And so this gives them a lot of benefits on their production site that is more than just buying into a recovery plan.
And the peace of mind in and of itself is priceless. You can't.
Absolutely.
Craig, some thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things we find, particularly with small and medium-sized businesses, but even in some larger organizations, is a lack of internal in-house skill sets to properly design and execute on a disaster recovery plan. Again, in a lot of companies, the IT departments are so focused on stretched just to meet the day-to-day challenges that they're not really giving a lot of consideration to what happens on a rainy day, when disaster strikes, and how would they recover from that. So in that case, they really need to, again, take the time to step back, analyze their situation, and if they realize they don't have the skill sets, then it's time to talk to perhaps a service provider to, help them with that.
Any more on the hope for the best, expect the worst?
Actually, I'd like to follow up on the service provider comment, because it's a really good point that in looking at building a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, it's not just the technologies. In many cases, it's actually the data center where you're going to run it. If you go with a certified service provider, what you may find is that they are going to be better able to meet some of the regulations for data centers. SAS 70, for example, is required by Bill 198, which is basically Sarbanes-Oxley. There's other regulations that require that data centers are built in a certain way, procedures are written with ISO standards, things like that, that a service provider can provide for you that you may not be able to do on your own.
Okay, let's look ahead before we look ahead to our Q&A and wrap things up here. Where will network and IT developments take business continuity planning tomorrow? Is the future in the cloud, Lori?
I believe it's in the cloud, but I believe we're going to have a hybrid. I think a lot of things will move to public clouds, things will move to private clouds, a lot of things will stay virtualized, and you'll actually find that there's going to be some things that'll probably never move out of a physical environment and recovery. Something like a mainframe financial application. Many regulations are going to stop people from moving to the cloud for certain applications. So any given customer, I think, is going to have a hybrid environment, and the thing they need to focus on is how do they create a recovery plan that's very consistent, very focused, but still supports that hybrid environment.
Final thoughts, Craig?
I agree. I think it's going to be a hybridization of cloud and dedicated server hardware systems. Smaller organizations and those that are a bit more greenfield, they may actually choose to not have any physical server infrastructure whatsoever. It may be entirely cloud-based, but again, large organizations have so many of these legacy systems and hardware out there. That's not something you easily replicate into a cloud environment. It's very expensive, and also there's a significant risk involved. So this being said, with the greater reliance on the cloud, that makes the network actually a lot more important. Users aren't going to accept, applications running any differently off of a shared cloud environment versus, running off dedicated server hardware. They're going to expect the same or better performance, even though it's going to cost less to deliver it potentially. So, how do I ensure then that my network connectivity from my user environment to the cloud is going to offer levels of security, first of all, reliability of that connection, and the performance that users are going to expect? Well, we're going to see it's not just a question of increasing your bandwidth between your environment and the cloud. It's a question of, how is that bandwidth actually optimized for those applications? So you'll probably see organizations increasingly turning to WAN optimization technology, to application performance monitoring and networking to look at specific applications, how well they're running on the network, and actually then being able to tweak the network so that the mission critical applications get priority over less critical ones.
So a partly to mostly cloudy forecast, you would say that. And the future looks bright, which is good. I'd like to thank our panelists for being here today and providing a wealth of insight on the IT side of disaster recovery planning. And it looks like your recovery solution choice will depend mostly on your business requirements. What is mission critical versus business critical? Also keeping in mind how you'll protect your data, IT systems, and workforce continuity during an operational outage. They're all critical areas not to be overlooked. Once again, thanks to Craig and Lori for being here and sharing their considerable experience.